In the previous video of this series, we described the history of the Prince Crossing Station, a depot and electrical substation on the Elgin branch of the Chicago Aurora and Elgin Railroad during the first half of the 20th century. In this video, we'll describe efforts to save the building, before taking you on a tour of the exterior and interior of this historic structure, which today stands at the crossroads of its very existence.
There have been attempts to preserve the Prince Crossing building from imminent destruction, with appeals to the DuPage County Forest Preserve, whose land lies adjacent to the Prince Crossing property, to the Illinois Prairie Path Organization Board, to the City of West Chicago, and to the Illinois Historic Preservation Commission. But none of these organizations have been able or willing to help as yet.
One suggested proposal was for the DuPage County Forest Preserve to swap 1 or 2 acres of Prince Crossing land with Wheaton Academy, whose property also lies adjacent with the Forest Preserve, in order to make the educational institution whole. If a suitable volunteer organization could be established to maintain and possibly restore the Prince Crossing building, then the building could be saved with relatively little expense to the DuPage County taxpayers.
This is very much in line with the situation of the Clintonville Station in South Elgin, which is owned by the Kane County Forest Preserve, but is admirably maintained by the Valley Model Railroad Association. The Kane County Forest Preserve leases the building to the VMRA for effectively zero cost, and in return, the VMRA provides maintenance and upkeep for the substation structure and grounds. And it should be noted that they have been able to do so, including a new roof, a new heating system, security systems, indoor plumbing, and other improvements, at a very moderate annual cost, supplied by the relatively small but conscientious club. And lest anyone argue that this relationship cannot last long-term, the Kane County Forest Preserve and the VMRA have had this relationship for approximately 50 years. It demonstrates how local volunteer groups can work hand-in-hand with government institutions to preserve historic buildings at little cost to the community.
But this proposal has unfortunately not gained traction, so to speak, at least not yet. As Wheaton Academy appears to be set on its path to demolish this historic structure as part of a broader developmental plan, a local rail fan has entered the scene with a devotion to local history and who has taken it upon himself to preserve Prince Crossing Station. This rail fan is James Slattery. Although it would be highly desirable to keep the old station in situ, in its original context and place in the landscape, James has been working quietly in the background to do the next best thing. He aims to move the station to another location and set it up as a local railway museum devoted to the CA&E.
As one might expect, moving a structure such as this can be a very expensive and complicated process, especially given the building's size, age, and construction materials. Up to this point, James Slattery has been navigating this process largely on his own, with his own resources, and with his own time, in addition to working a full-time job. In spite of the many obstacles, James seems determined to make this happen, and hopes to have the building moved with the cooperation of Wheaton Academy by sometime in 2025.
Early in 2024, while obtaining quotes from subcontractors, and with the kind permission of Wheaton Academy, James invited us to document the Prince Crossing Station via videos and photographs, within the constraints of a few hours' time. As we had previously documented the Clintonville Station, a structural sibling to the Prince Crossing substation, we were keen to see what additional details the Prince Crossing Station could reveal about AE&C and CA&E substation design.
We will first examine the exterior of the building, as well as the adjacent former rail yard. We will then investigate the interior of the 1920s West Addition followed by the first floor and wire tower of the original 1902 substation, and then completing the first floor with a look at the passenger annex, built in the mid-1910s. And we will end the tour in what we believe to be the most interesting and historically important part of the station, in its dark and labyrinthine basement.
We will first look at the south face of the structure, trackside. The structure is constructed entirely, walls and foundation, with common pressed brick. The designers utilized a subtle corbelled effect to break up the long brick face into recessed compartments. The brickwork is in tolerable shape after 100 years or more, but there are definite signs of degradation and decay, particularly in the second story of the West Addition. The opening for the windows and doors of the West Addition are still present, although the windows are now boarded up.
Moving to the original 1902 building, we see that the leftmost portal was bricked up at some time in the past. Then a square window was inserted into this opening, now also bricked closed. Two large windows are on the face of the original structure. Originally, they were arched windows with a semicircle top. Those windows were replaced with square windows, which have since been bricked up. The rightmost door opening for the 1902 structure yet exists, although boarded up. We'll discuss the north face of the wire tower, including the wire terminals, when we explore the interior of the tower.
Meanwhile, the eastern passenger annex originally had an arched window to the left of the door, which was not included when the annex was rebuilt more than a dozen years ago. The door opening still remains, although the current door is modern. Another feature of the front facade is the gutter system, where a set of gutters drain the roof of the main building, pitched slightly towards the front of the structure.
Next, we move to the west facade of the building, which is the west wall of the West Addition. Notice how the decorative brick design of this addition closely matches the corbelled decor of the original 1902 build. The second-story square window openings are still intact, but the windows themselves are badly damaged. On the first story, at some point in the past, the bottom right arched window was replaced with a service door with a metal stairway. The middle window opening remains, although boarded up, while the left bottom window has been completely bricked closed. There are also 3 basement windows facing west, and those 2 are boarded or bricked up. There is one remnant of an electrical interface just below the middle window, with 3 insulated openings, suggesting an interface for high-voltage alternating current wires.
The rear, or north face, of the structure was more plain. However, it has many interesting features. There were originally 4 windows on the back of the West Addition. The top 2 were rectangular, while the bottom 2 were tall and narrow. The lower right window has been completely bricked closed, while the lower left window has been boarded up. The 2 upper windows are somewhat intact. There were no windows in the middle of this wall, as the interior of the building has a wire chase, or flue, that runs up the height of the building, terminating at the flue cap still evident at the top of the building. The top of the flue may have terminated high-voltage wires, as well as provided venting in order to cool the electrical machinery within the substation addition. Another electrical artifact is the presence of 2 rows of 5 insulated openings at the upper right. Lower down, to the right of the left bottom window, are a pair of pipe openings, perhaps electrical.
The remainder of the north face is largely the north face of the original 1902 building. The vent structure to the right was a later addition. The lower doorway heading into the basement was likely added after the 1920s addition, perhaps in the early 1930s. As we will see, that basement opening disrupted the original brick structures in the basement. The main door on the north face likely replaced an arched window, matching the arched window to its right. Its brick stairway is crumbling into oblivion. The 2 arched window openings in the upper wire tower yet remain, although none of the 3 windows we see today are original, but were replaced at some point in the past. A large circular opening to the left of the facade, which once framed a wooden vent, complete with an awning, has been bricked up. This vent was used to draw in outside air as part of the building's cooling system. There are at least 2 electrical interfaces of interest, both of which were early additions. The 2 sets of 3 electrical insulators indicate their use as high-voltage alternating current interfaces. One of these may have been an original electrical feed heading off to West Chicago in the early 1910s.
Finally, at the basement level, to the left of the basement door, are what appear to be 3 sets of 3 ceramic openings, perhaps for AC wire egress. Coming around to the east facade of the building, we can see that the rear of the passenger annex has and had a rear door, although this door is not original. The stone staircase beneath it looks fairly rough. The arched window opening of the original 1902 building remains intact, although the window itself has been replaced. The east face of the east annex was rebuilt about 15 years ago, with the 2 window openings in roughly the right place, although the rebuilt window openings are smaller than the original, and the windows are modern. Originally, too, there would have been another decorative column coming down the middle of the wall, creating 2 insets, with the windows centered in those insets.
We will end our tour of the exterior by examining the rail yard of the former depot, especially the area to the south of the former trackway, where once stood a sequence of wire towers of wood and steel construction over the course of 60 years. Littering this area are several sets of concrete bases that supported the wire towers and light poles. Impressive wooden wire towers were also present in the earliest days of the railroad, although those bases and poles have long since been removed. This former right-of-way is yet an easement for Commonwealth Edison, the electrical utility, which had its origins in Samuel Insull's Public Service Company of Northern Illinois. Another curious find out here, covered by a piece of plywood, is what appears to be another well or drainage pit of some kind. We must docket this discovery.
Now let's move to the interior of the building, starting with the first floor of the west addition, as this large industrial door is the primary means of ingress and egress for the building, which is still used for storage by Wheaton Academy. The first impression walking into this voluminous space is a lack of a second floor, although there is a mezzanine, which we'll see shortly. The steel girders supporting the roof are plainly visible. From the interior, we can see that the second-story windows, with 5x3 panes, and a few of the first-story windows, with 5x4 panes, are still intact, although mostly boarded up on the exterior. An industrial natural gas space heater hangs down next to the west wall. The narrow windows on the north side of the first floor are bricked or boarded up.
A steel staircase leads up to a mezzanine along the north wall of the west addition. The mezzanine has a concrete floor about 12 feet wide across the length of the north wall, overlooking the southern open portion of the space. Plywood covers a few large openings in the floor, perhaps 2 feet wide by several feet long, along the south edge of the mezzanine. The 2 3x3 windows are still in reasonable shape, although one is completely boarded up. There are 2 brick wire flues, which ascend from the first floor, up through the structure's ceiling, centered on the north wall. Each flue is approximately 6.5 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep. Within each flue are 3 equally spaced round portals. It is highly likely that each of these carried a single high-voltage wire, as part of a three-phase alternating current circuit within a single wire flue, the building thus supporting two sets of three-phase high-voltage wiring.
More evidence for the electrical function of this building is within the concrete floors on the first floor and mezzanine. The concrete mezzanine has large openings, about 2 feet wide and several feet long, likely for wiring to pass from first floor machinery to mezzanine machinery. Today, these openings are covered with plywood. Likewise, the first story's concrete floor has a series of holes to serve as channels for electrical wiring between the basement and the first story. Based on contemporary photographs and descriptions of other automated CA&E substations of that period, the equipage likely included lightning arresters, single-phase transformers, high-speed circuit breakers, load-limiting resistors, a single 1,000 kilowatt six-phase rotary converter, and a supervisory control panel. These same sources indicate that the lightning arresters and transformers were mounted on the outside of the building. For the Prince Crossing substation, this was to the west of the building. The large rotary converter sat on the main floor, along with the control panels. The circuit breakers and load-limiting resistors were likely situated on the mezzanine.
We'll examine the basement of this substation addition later. For now, we'll head into the main room, once called the rotary room, of the original 1902 Ingleton substation. This large space is still used for storage by the school. As this room was the main work area for the Sidwell studio and other subsequent activities, it has been modified significantly from early days. The windows and some of the doorways have all been bricked up, but the original arched window openings are yet evident. There were 3 brick wire flues on the north wall of the interior, resembling chimneys. They carried high-voltage wiring from the wire tower down to the basement. The ceiling is for the most part original, with steel girders carrying the weight of the roof to a set of steel posts and the brick walls. The high-strength concrete floor is intact, although the many floor openings, once situated beneath the heavy equipment in this room, have almost all been filled in.
However, one floor opening remains, and it's very informative and exciting to see. Along the east end of the original substation wall is a long, wood-lined opening, about 1 foot wide by 15 feet long. This was to allow wiring for the substation's master control panel to come up from the basement, as all wiring was kept beneath the floor of the rotary room. Adjacent to this linear opening is another square opening. Beneath it is a ladder leading up from the basement. This cubby access may have been the primary ingress and egress into the basement during the first few decades of operation. The ladder is possibly original to that time, perhaps 100 years old or more.
Next, we move up into the former wire tower of the original substation. Today, there is a steel circular staircase leading up into this space, complete with safety railings, although these are all modern additions. Originally, this space would have been accessed via a wooden ladder. The interior of the wire tower betrays much of its original design. Only 1 brick wire flue remains from the original 3, the westmost flue. And signs of repairs of the original brick wall with concrete cinder block is evident. There were small arched operable windows facing in all directions from the tower, bringing in plenty of light and ventilation. Today, most of these windows are boarded or bricked up, and the north windows have been replaced with modern versions. The wire tower was originally the primary ingress and egress for the high-voltage three-phase wiring, and you can still see the insulated terminals mounted on the south face of the tower wall. Opposite to these terminals along the wire flues on the north side of the tower were once lightning arresters, mounted on wooden brackets. These arresters protected the wiring and machinery below from lightning strikes.
To complete the tour of the above-ground space, we'll now take a look at the passenger annex, built in the 1910s and rebuilt 15 to 20 years ago. Packed with school chairs today, the annex is a shadow of its former self. Originally, the walls of this addition were likely 2 to 3 courses thick, while the main building was 4 or more courses deep. However, due to a shortage of matching bricks, the Salt Creek Model Railroad Club, members of which rebuilt this annex, had to resort to using a brick veneer, covering a wood stud-supported interior. The doors and windows are modern and placed in roughly the right place relative to the original design.
Members of the Model Railroad Club have informed us that there was no evidence for partitioning of this space originally, nor was there evidence of a restroom. This was a simple, modest-sized waiting room, roughly 15 feet by 20 feet in dimension, heated by a cast-iron stove, with perhaps a ticket agent's desk or cubby in the southwest corner of the room, immediately to the left of passengers entering from the south door. Although simple and modest, to put this into perspective, in the 1920 timeframe, this would have been the nicest passenger shelter along the Elgin branch of the AE&C.
Finally, we move on to the basement, which we believe to be the least disturbed, most historically relevant, and most revealing part of this old structure. To get into the basement today, there is a large opening in the floor of the 1920s addition, with a dangerous-looking steel lid suspended overhead. The staircase itself is made of solid brick, suggesting that it was part of the original design for the western addition.
We first enter into the rooms beneath the 1920s western addition, where heavy substation equipment was installed on the floors above. The damp concrete floor is strewn with debris. The ceiling is of reinforced concrete to bear the weight of heavy machinery above. The primary room in this space is roughly 15 feet by 20 feet, with a terracotta-lined water pit in the center, topped by an old rusty open grate. The pit is surmounted with an old water pump, the piping facing south or trackside. Some believe this pit to be a cistern, while others believe it to be a sump pit for removing water, as the substation is positioned just south of a swampy area with a high water table. Is this pit somehow related to the pit found 100 feet or so due south of the station among the multiple wire tower bases? If there were more time, we would attempt to gauge the depth of the pit. Deep would suggest a cistern, while shallow would indicate a sump pit. This room is lined with old metal shelves. One west-facing window is bricked up, while the second window yet frames a possibly original wooden louver for ventilation.
Adjacent to this room is a smaller room, about 10 feet wide by 25 feet long. On the door is painted a sign providing a clue to its early function. Some have interpreted a battery room to mean the use of large battery banks for stabilization of the voltage load, but that does not seem likely in this instance. Battery banks for this type of usage were not common until the middle of the 20th century or later, due to the heavy expense of lead-acid batteries, as well as the special training required to maintain such facilities. Exceptions to this were to be found at main power plants or urban substations, not in rural substations.
Nor is the room's design suggestive of it being used to store a large battery bank. The primary design rule for rooms with such battery banks was good ventilation, to protect against the buildup of hydrogen gas resulting from recharging the open-cell batteries. This room has a single window opening on the west side of the room, and we found no indication of additional venting of this space. Also, battery bank rooms used wall, flooring, and shelving materials that were not prone to corrosion from the acidic atmosphere. This room has metal shelving and exposed brick. And finally, it would not appear to be a good design choice to place a possible large source of explosive hydrogen immediately beneath your most expensive and critical power equipment.
Contemporary descriptions of traction substations in this time period instead indicate that this room was most likely used for storing a small number of lead-acid batteries, for backup or emergency power to control the equipment on the floors above, and for substation lighting. Also curious, on the east side of this battery room, on the west subterranean wall of the original substation, are 3 openings, about 12 inches in diameter, bricked up. These openings align perfectly with the brick compartments on the other side of this wall, in the basement of the original 1902 substation. We believe that this alignment was created in order to use the west flue of the original wire tower to bring in the high voltage power from the Batavia power plant and deliver it into the newly created 1920 substation.
Next, we move into the basement of the original 1902 substation, through an opening created when the 1920s addition was built. Being somewhat untouched, we believe this part of the building to be the most historically relevant part of the structure. There is no electricity or windows in this part of the building, and so in complete darkness, perhaps for decades. The basement air is dank and musty. The concrete basement floor is littered with debris, broken bricks and glass, bits of metal and rotting wood. A failed sink and toilet, an addition from latter days of the substation, hide within the shambles.
Entering this space, we immediately see the curious brick structures lining the north wall of the basement, in some disarray. The structure is about 5.5 feet tall, with 3 rows of openings. In fact, each row is a rectangular tube, about 18 inches high by 18 inches wide, extending most of the length of the building, with a 4-inch concrete slab base. The openings for each of the 3 vertical rows are staggered horizontally from east to west, creating a stair-step effect. The arched openings almost give the impression of bread ovens.
These are bus bar compartments, sometimes called wire bus compartments, or high-tension compartments, the high tension being the early form of the term high voltage. Some have suggested that these are battery storage shelves, as in a battery bank, but such battery banks were not widely used for decades from when these were built, and it would be very inefficient storage space, as most of the shelf space would have been inaccessible and hence unused. But we can be certain that these were bus bar compartments, as period trade articles clearly picture and refer to these structures as such. Here, too, we can see that the original bus bar compartment structure, once spanning almost the entire north wall, was disrupted when a basement door and stairs were installed, likely after the 1920s substation addition. The bathroom would likely have come even later.
As at Clintonville, the concrete ceiling is packed with large holes, where once stood power equipment, such as oil switches, transformers, and rotary converters. These openings allowed wiring to pass between equipment via the basement, and also enabled pressurized basement air to cool the machinery above.
The original substation basement is a labyrinthine warren of brick rooms, most long and narrow. The purpose of these rooms was twofold. First, the brick walls were structural, shoring up the concrete floor above, which bore the weight of multi-ton machinery. Second, the various rooms behaved as pressurized air chambers, directing cool and pressurized basement air through selected machinery on the first floor. You can still see the ceramic insulated openings that enabled wiring to pass through the walls, from oil switches to transformers to rotary converters.
A small room is situated beneath the master control panel, where we can see the vintage ladder leading the way upwards. There was a large opening in the concrete floor above that may have allowed for a stairway at one time, perhaps when first building the substation. But then it was filled in at some later point to restrict access into the basement, which housed all the substation wiring, and was hence a very dangerous place to venture.
One mystery that remained from Clintonville was how the 600 volts of direct current made its way from the trackside or south part of the substation to the third rail, just a few tens of feet away. We hypothesized that there would have been a below-grade pair of openings in the structure, somewhere on the south side of the building, to make the shortest path to the third rail. At Prince Crossing, we have the opportunity to test this idea, as the south wall is more accessible than at Clintonville, although it requires us to navigate along a very narrow, dark, and dead-end passage, perhaps 2 feet wide. Could these two black insulated tubes have been used for the third rail bonding wires?
Beyond this wall to the west, there is another small brick room, today beneath the 1920s West Addition, but once on the west exterior of the 1902 substation. Here can be seen the other side of these tubes, once referred to as fiber conduit or Orangeburg pipe. As we have shown, there are a substantial number of mysterious wires, pipes, and openings throughout this aging structure. Reconstructing the likely purpose and sequence of these features, these relic clues of the station's function and history, would require further study. But time is running out for the old building, and the destruction, or even movement of this structure, may erase what we can learn from its weary bones.
If you would like to help James in the quest to save the Prince Crossing station, either volunteering or financial, his contact information is in the video description. Many thanks to Wheaton Academy for allowing us to film and photograph the Prince Crossing building. Thanks also to our Be Historic channel community, our subscribers, and our generous Patreon supporters. As always, if you enjoy these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And if you are so inclined, consider supporting our channel via Patreon. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you, in a manner of speaking, in our next video adventure.